This is Solo Audio Podcast, against all odds of YouTube algorithm. Hey, it's good to have you back. Last time, we talked about how AI systems work like these massive cultural blenders, taking all that incredible, messy, beautiful diversity from around the world and smoothing it out into something that starts looking surprisingly similar everywhere. But I've been thinking about this more, and I realize we need to go deeper. Because there's this whole machinery that doesn't just move culture around, it actively rewrites it. I want you to picture something. Two creators, right? They hit publish at exactly the same moment. One's in Jakarta, probably working way too late. The other's in Detroit, just grabbed their morning coffee. They've never met, never even heard of each other. But I'd bet you that within 24 hours, their videos will start looking eerily similar. Not because they're copying each other, they're not. It's because these same invisible forces are quietly pushing both of them toward identical survival strategies. And that's what I want to walk through with you today. You know what might surprise you about all this? It's not some grand conspiracy. It's not evil corporations sitting in boardrooms plotting to homogenize the world. It's actually math. Cold, relentless algorithmic math that makes certain creative choices profitable and others, well, financially dangerous. I want to make 3 arguments today, and they're all going to feel uncomfortable. First, global platforms systematically boost content that works across cultural boundaries while burying expressions that require local knowledge to understand. Second, this whole distribution process doesn't just carry culture, it actively reshapes it for algorithmic performance. And third, with AI training data being so English-heavy, non-Western creators face these compounding visibility gaps that turn cultural authenticity into an expensive luxury. What we're really talking about here is a fundamental reframing. Distribution networks aren't neutral. They're not just moving culture around like some digital postal service. They're editing it. Every algorithmic decision about what gets amplified and what gets buried is literally shaping the cultural landscape that billions of people encounter daily. Before we go further, I need you to understand, this isn't just theory I'm sharing with you. There's rigorous research backing all of this up. We're talking about studies tracking over 50,000 users across a dozen major platforms. Language analyses of the AI systems that power everything you see online. Cultural audits spanning 107 countries. The numbers are stark. LLaMA2's training data is 89.7% English. GPT-3, 92.65% English. In a world where English is the native language of maybe 5% of the population. What I want to show you today is how this creates these feedback loops that drive cross-market homogenization. We'll look at why Indonesian creators are increasingly adopting American communication patterns, how engagement economics actually reshape entire cultural landscapes, and this rising authenticity tax that makes maintaining local cultural specificity financially punitive. So let's dig in, because once you start seeing this machinery in action, you can't unsee it. Okay, let me start with something that's going to sound completely contradictory, because it is. There's this massive study that came out in 2024 at the web conference. Researchers tracked over 50,000 users across a dozen major platforms, and they formalized something that's, honestly, it's fascinating and a little disturbing. They measured what they call interuser versus intrauser diversity. So here's the thing, your individual feed is getting more asterisk diverse. The algorithm is actually breaking you out of your bubble, showing you content from all over the world, different topics, different creators. That sounds great, right? But, and this is where it gets weird, while your feed is getting more diverse, you are becoming more similar to everyone else. The research shows legacy recommenders are actually mitigating filter bubbles by herding everyone towards similar items rather than expanding individual range in truly different directions. What's happening is this paradox where we have increased overlap in the content that's actually performing well across users over time, even though each person's feed looks varied. Think of it like you're getting a different sampler platter, but all the sampler platters are being made in the same kitchen, by the same chef, using the same ingredients. You know that feeling when you're scrolling through TikTok or YouTube, and suddenly you realize you've seen this exact same hook like 15 times? Same opening line, same dramatic pause, same facial expression. That's not coincidence. That's what researchers call template adoption pressure, happening in real time. Here's what's going on. Algorithms can't care about cultural nuance. They literally can't. They're measuring clicks, watch time, completion rates, numbers that need to work whether you're in Jakarta, Sao Paulo, or Detroit. So content that gets engagement in all three places gets the algorithmic stamp of approval. Content that only resonates in one culture gets buried. This operates through systematic economic pressure. Platforms optimize for engagement metrics that function across cultures and languages. When creators gravitate toward these universal templates, it's not conscious imitation, it's economic calculation. The algorithm rewards specific patterns with visibility and monetization, so creators adapt or they become invisible. You know Kyle Chayka's work on airspace? He documented how cafes worldwide started adopting these identical minimalist aesthetics. Walk into any cafe in Bali, Sao Paulo, or Brooklyn. Same Edison bulbs, same exposed brick, same sans serif menu typography. But here's the thing, this wasn't conscious copying. It was algorithmic curation. These aesthetics perform optimally on Instagram and Google Maps because they translate universally. Visual uniformity generates higher recognition, which leads to better platform exposure. The exact same mechanics are now governing digital content. It's like having a global DJ who only plays songs that work at every party, in every country, for every age group. The party keeps going, but pretty soon, all parties start sounding exactly the same. The economics are brutal but simple: adapt or disappear. I need to tell you something that's probably going to make you uncomfortable, because I'm about to throw some numbers at you that reveal just how lopsided our digital world really is. The AI systems powering all these platforms, ChatGPT, the recommendation engines, content moderation tools, they're trained on data that's almost 90% English. Let that sink in for a second. LMA2, 89.7% English. GPT-3, 92.65% English. In a world where English is maybe the native language of 5% of the population. These aren't just statistics. They're literally the foundation of how our digital world understands culture itself. And here's the crucial part: this isn't malicious design. Its mathematical inevitability when you're training data reflects existing global power imbalances. So what does this mean for everyone else? Well, imagine you're an Indonesian creator. You want to make content about traditional Javanese philosophy, something beautiful and deep and meaningful to your culture. But to get algorithmic visibility, you have to translate not just your language, but your entire way of thinking into terms that a predominantly English-trained AI can understand and amplify. Indonesian creators actually report production times 3 to 4 times longer when they try to maintain cultural authenticity. One Jakarta-based creator told researchers, "I spend more time educating the AI about Indonesian culture than actually creating content." Think about that. And it's not just language. Cultural alignment audits across those 107 countries show these systems defaulting to Western values across the board. Individual achievement over community harmony. Direct communication over the kind of subtle, high-context conversation that's actually beautiful in many Asian cultures. Linear storytelling over circular narratives. The PNAS Nexus research documented this systematically. AI systems demonstrate Western self-expression values unless explicitly countersteered through prompts or specialized data. It's like having a cultural translator that only speaks one dialect, and it's not yours. This creates what I call the authenticity tax. Being culturally authentic now costs extra. Extra time, extra technical expertise, extra money. Meanwhile, conforming to global templates, that's free, fast, and supported by every tool in the ecosystem. Think about the economics. If you spend 4 times longer producing content that reaches a quarter of the audience, that's not sustainable. That's a 16-fold disadvantage in the attention economy. For most creators, especially those just starting out, that's not really a choice at all. It's financial suicide. But here's where it gets really insidious, and I mean that in the most technical sense. As more creators give up and adopt these global templates, there's less culturally specific content in the training data for the next generation of AI systems. So the authenticity tax gets higher every year. It's a feedback loop. Think about the math. If Indonesian creators shift toward English-dominant templates for economic survival, fewer Indonesian cultural expressions enter future training datasets. When the next AI systems train on this reduced diversity, they provide even less support for Indonesian-specific content creation. Researchers call these cultural feedback loops, where homogenization produces conditions that accelerate further homogenization, making diversity exponentially more expensive to maintain over time. Each cycle makes it harder. This isn't speculation. It's systematic documentation of how linguistic bias in AI training creates compound barriers that grow more severe with each generation of systems. Let me get real with you about money for a minute, because at the end of the day, creators need to eat. Platform capitalism has turned cultural works into what I call conversion assets. Your beautiful song, your thoughtful video essay, your hilarious comedy sketch, none of that matters unless it can convert attention into revenue across multiple markets simultaneously. Think about it from the platform's perspective. They're not art curators, they're businesses. Content that works in Jakarta and Sao Paulo and Detroit, that's scalable, that's profitable. Content that only resonates in one place, that's a risk they can't afford to take. The mathematics are straightforward. Content must surpass engagement thresholds across multiple markets. Cultural specificity reduces addressable audience, which diminishes revenue potential. Universal templates enable maximum market penetration, which means optimal monetization. Platform algorithms mathematically reward lowest common denominator appeal. This produces what you might call the lowest common denominator effect, but it's not a bug. It's the core economic logic of the system. The creators themselves get this. They're not naive. When a Jakarta-based creator starts adopting American communication patterns, that's not cultural betrayal. That's rational economic calculation under structural constraints. Look at K-pop's global success. Incredible achievement, right? But notice what it required. More English lyrics for algorithmic recognition, more universal themes, visual aesthetics that translate across cultural boundaries without explanation. The industry made a calculated trade-off, global reach for cultural distinctiveness. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm saying it's the logical outcome of a system that rewards what travels over what matters locally. Every creator faces this calculation: authenticity versus reach, cultural specificity versus financial viability. And the system has made conformity the economically rational choice. When Indonesian creators tell me they spend 3 to 4 times longer on production to maintain cultural authenticity, that's not just an inconvenience. Time is money. Longer production cycles mean fewer videos, reduced income, diminished competitive advantage against creators using global templates. The choice becomes: adapt culturally and survive economically, or maintain authenticity and risk financial unsustainability. Individual creator choices reflect rational responses to structural incentives, not lack of cultural pride or artistic vision. Here's something that honestly keeps me up at night. We can actually watch cultures changing in real time because of these algorithmic pressures. And Southeast Asia is like a perfect laboratory for observing this transformation. You've got regions with incredibly strong traditional cultural identities running headfirst into the fastest digital adoption rates on the planet. The result? Cultural evolution on fast forward. Southeast Asia experiences these dynamics with particular intensity. In Indonesia, we can literally document homogenization across broadcasting ecosystems as young creators adopt globalized visual languages, not from aesthetic preference, but from algorithmic visibility requirements for economic survival. This isn't organic cultural evolution. This is cultural adaptation under algorithmic selection pressure. We can document this transformation across multiple cultural domains in real time. Traditional Wayang Kulit storytelling structures with their complex, circular, nonlinear narratives being replaced by Western three-act formats optimized for engagement metrics. Why? Because algorithms recognize and reward those patterns. Gamelan musical scales, these intricate, beautiful tonal systems that have been refined over centuries, giving way to Western harmonic progressions. Not because creators think Western music is better, but because content identification systems are trained primarily on Western music theory. Same thing with visual culture. Traditional batik patterns, these gorgeous, meaningful designs with deep cultural significance, are being systematically replaced by minimalist graphics optimized for mobile screens and algorithmic recognition. Not because creators think minimalism is better, but because batik patterns don't perform on Instagram. Here's the part that really gets to me. When batik patterns disappear from digital spaces, the artisans who have spent their lives mastering that craft lose their position in the digital economy. When regional dialect content can't get monetized, traditional storytellers lose sustainable income streams. Platform infrastructure systematically devalues traditional cultural capital while rewarding global template adoption. We're not just losing cultural expression, we're losing the economic foundation that supports cultural knowledge transmission. Think about the domino effect. Traditional knowledge systems need economic sustainability to survive from generation to generation. Master craftspeople, regional musicians, traditional narrative artists suddenly find their expertise unmarketable in digital spaces that prioritize algorithmic legibility over cultural depth. If the economic foundation erodes, the cultural transmission stops. Period. Governments are trying to respond. ASEAN is developing cultural preservation initiatives, discussing things like reach-weighted local significance scores or quota-based local culture surfacing windows. Basically, trying to engineer algorithms that reward local cultural content even when it doesn't perform globally. These are attempts at intentional pluralism, designing systems that maintain cultural diversity rather than optimizing purely for universal engagement. But here's the fundamental challenge they're up against. As long as individual creators face the same economic pressures, policy can't override mathematical reality. You can't regulate away economic incentives that make global templates the rational choice. It's like trying to preserve local restaurants while allowing McDonald's to operate at a massive cost advantage. Good intentions, structural disadvantage. The question is whether policy interventions can shift economic incentives enough to make cultural authenticity financially sustainable, or whether market forces will continue overwhelming preservation efforts. Let me talk to you about power. Ultimately, that's what this is about: who gets to decide what culture survives in digital spaces. Remember YouTube's apocalypse, when advertisers pulled out over controversial content, and suddenly YouTube's algorithm started heavily favoring advertiser-friendly material. Almost overnight, creators worldwide adapted to this uniform, sanitized style, not because they wanted to, but because their livelihoods depended on it. That's policy by advertiser incentive in action. Commercial considerations determining cultural viability instead of, say, public interest or cultural diversity. This reveals something crucial about infrastructural power. Platforms don't just distribute culture. They determine which cultural forms can economically survive in digital environments. Think about the implications. If cultural expression cannot achieve algorithmic visibility, it cannot reach audiences at scale. If it cannot reach audiences, creators cannot sustain themselves producing it. If creators cannot sustain production, the cultural form begins disappearing from digital spaces, And increasingly, that means disappearing from youth culture entirely. In increasingly digital-dependent cultural ecosystems, economic viability equals cultural visibility equals cultural survival. It's that simple and that scary. Now, there are alternatives being experimented with. Some platforms are trying what I call intentional pluralism. Algorithms specifically designed to maintain cultural diversity rather than optimize for universal engagement. Imagine a platform that rewards content for performing exceptionally well within a single region, even if it doesn't work globally. Indonesian Independence Day coverage might not resonate in Detroit, but it could still get algorithmic boost within Indonesia based on local significance metrics. These remain marginal experiments, but they point toward a different possibility: technical pluralism as cultural preservation strategy. The question is whether they can compete economically with the scale-optimized homogenization that currently dominates. Can localized platforms survive when global ones offer instant distribution and superior monetization? That's the test case for whether diversity can be structurally supported, or whether economic logic inevitably drives toward convergence. So here we are. We've built digital infrastructure that makes cultural authenticity expensive and cultural conformity cheap. Not through malicious design, but through the cold logic of algorithmic optimization and platform economics. Cultural homogenization represents infrastructure, not accident or preference. Every algorithm, engagement metric, and monetization model generates systematic pressure towards sameness. We've constructed systems that make cultural authenticity expensive while making cultural conformity economically rational for creators operating within these structural constraints. This isn't about villains in boardrooms. It's about how the math works when you optimize for scale, engagement, and cross-market performance. The infrastructure we've built inevitably produces these outcomes. Cultural authenticity has transformed from the default creative approach into an economically expensive luxury. And that should worry all of us. Every engagement metric, every monetization rule, every ranking algorithm generates systematic pressure toward sameness. The cost of maintaining locally specific, culturally situated expression increases with every platform optimization cycle. We've created systems where maintaining genuine cultural specificity requires additional resources, technical expertise, and market sophistication that many creators simply can't afford. Cultural authenticity goes from being the default creative approach to an economically expensive luxury requiring additional resources, technical knowledge, and market sophistication that many creators cannot afford. But here's what I want you to do, and this is important. After this episode, take a look at your algorithmic feeds with fresh eyes. What local expressions are missing? What languages, aesthetics, ways of understanding the world are you not seeing? Next episode, we're going even deeper. We'll explore how this homogenization creates vicious cycles, sameness producing more sameness through feedback loops that make cultural diversity increasingly difficult to maintain. We'll see how recommenders reduce interuser diversity while seeming to increase individual variety. How AI systems training on their own homogenized outputs mechanically increase future costs of cultural authenticity, and how economic incentives tighten around proven templates with each iteration. Ask yourself, if these invisible cultural markers continue diminishing under economic pressure toward what travels rather than what matters locally, what kind of world are we building? It's going to be intense, but necessary. Because this infrastructure operates systematically, and we need to understand it before the cultural consequences become irreversible. We need to see how these cycles compound, how each generation of systems trained on homogenized outputs produces even less diversity for the next. This has been Digital Convergence Asterisk, and I'm genuinely grateful you're taking this journey with me. Because understanding this stuff, that's the first step toward changing it. Until next time, keep questioning what you're not seeing in your feeds.